On Tuesday, President Donald Trump used his Truth Social platform to share a message about the 2020 presidential election in Georgia. He said some things that people have looked into times before. The President Donald Trump repost had claims that courts and election people and other investigators have said are not true times already. President Donald Trump is still talking about the 2020 election in Georgia on his Truth Social platform. There was a post on the internet that said something about the election in Georgia. This post was not from someone who was supposed to have it. From someone else. It said that a lot of ballots in Georgia were counted 2 times during the 2020 election. The post said that this was done on purpose and that it was not an election. The people who wrote the post were very upset. They wanted some people to be arrested. They wanted Georgia Governor Brian Kemp to be arrested. They also wanted Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to be arrested. They wanted Atlanta election worker Ruby Freeman to be arrested too. The post was talking about the election in Georgia and the people who were in charge of it, like Georgia Governor Brian Kemp and Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and Atlanta election worker Ruby Freeman. President Trump wrote back to the post. Said thank you to the person who wrote it. He also said again that some people did something. President Trump said this even though there is no proof that these things actually happened. President Trump is still talking about these accusations. The allegations talked about in the post come from a court filing about Fulton County election records. This filing is about Georgia's election verification process. In this process they use paper records called tabulator tapes. An attorney said that some of these tabulator tapes were missing the signatures of poll workers, which are required. These missing signatures were on tapes for around 315,000 votes for the Georgia election. The Georgia election verification process uses these tabulator tapes to keep track of votes. Election officials and legal experts want to make it clear that the problem was with the paperwork, not the number of votes. The election officials and legal experts say that there is no proof that any votes were counted more than once or changed in any way. The election officials and legal experts also say that there is no proof that anyone did anything when they were counting the votes. The election officials and legal experts do not think that the mistake had any effect on who won the election. The Secretary of State Raffensperger talked about the claims in public. He said that the Georgia election system has steps to make sure everything is correct. This includes voters showing a photo identification and checking the results after the election. The Secretary of State Raffensperger made it clear that a mistake with paperwork does not make the votes that people legally cast invalid. It also does not change the results of the Georgia election. The Secretary of State Raffensperger wants people to know that the Georgia election system is safe and that the results are accurate. The people in charge of Georgia courts and the federal courts have already looked into this. They say the election results from 2020 in Georgia are correct. They even did this more than once to make sure. Some people from the party and some people from the Democratic Party did their own investigations. They did not find any proof that a lot of people cheated when they voted. The Georgia election results from 2020 are accurate. That is what the Georgia courts and the federal courts have said. People who study law were also unhappy with what was being said. A professor of law from Georgia, Anthony Michael Kreis, said these claims were not responsible and not based on what we know to be true. He said that if we keep saying things that are not true, it will hurt people's trust in the democratic system. The professor thinks that this is a problem because it affects how people feel about democratic institutions, like the government. Anthony Michael Kreis is worried that people will start to doubt the system if false allegations keep being promoted. The Department of Justice and Georgia election people have said over and over that election workers like Ruby Freeman were wrongly accused and treated badly because of claims that were not true. There have been no charges that have been proven to be real about a lot of voter fraud in Georgia's 2020 election. The Department of Justice and Georgia election people are still saying that Ruby Freeman and other election workers were not doing anything. President Trump is still saying that the 2020 election results are not correct. The people who are in charge of elections want us to know that all the legal work was finished a long time ago. The official results are still the same. The courts have said over and over that the claims President Trump is making do not have enough proof to back them up. The election officials are telling us that the 2020 election results are final and the President Trump claims about the election are not supported by facts. When it comes to things people say about elections, experts think it is an idea for people to pay attention to what courts have actually decided. Official checks of the votes and news that is based on facts. People should not just believe what they see online if it has not been checked. They should look at information and news from trustworthy sources instead of just looking at things people post online about elections. Experts want people to be careful about what they believe about elections. This story remains part of a broader national debate over election integrity, misinformation, and political accountability. Sarah Brock's News will continue to report developments based on confirmed records and official statements.